So welcome everybody to the first Relevance Researchers Network event of 2022. We are now a year old. And I'm very pleased to introduce Manuel Padilla Cruz, who is going to talk to us today. Manuel holds a PhD in English Language and Linguistics from the Universidad de Sevilla, where he is Associate Professor and Head of the Research Group Intercultural Studies, Pragmatics and Discourse Issues. His interests fall within the field of pragmatics and more specifically within the areas of cognitive, societal, intercultural, interlanguage and historical pragmatics. And his work has addressed a variety of issues, including emphatic communication, interjection, speech acts, politeness and impoliteness, humour, epistemic vigilance, misunderstanding, L2 learners' pragmatic performance, procedural meaning, lexical pragmatics and epistemic injustices. Quite a significant list there of contributions. Mainly adopting a relevance theoretic approach, his work has been published in international journals and he's co-edited various collections, including the recent Relevance Theory, New Developments, Current Challenges and Future Directions, and a special issue with Pragmatics and Cognition. So we're really pleased to have him presenting to us today on the topic of morphological, lexical, phrasal and clausal triggers of ad hoc concept construction. So I shall say no more and pass over to Manuel.
Okay, so thank you very much for the introduction, Kate. Thank you very much for your invitation to talk today at this Relevance Research Network, Ryoko and Kate. I'm really honored to present my ideas in this venue. Okay, so also thank you for being on the other side of the screen. Okay, now can you see my screen? Can you see it?
Yes, we can.
Okay, just a second. I need to move to presentation mode. Okay, here it is. Okay, so as Kate has already said, the title of my talk today is Morphological, Lexical, Phrasal and Clausal Triggers of ad hoc concept construction. And my aim today with this talk is to present a possible catalog, a possible list of the linguistic elements that could trigger ad hoc concept construction. In order to do this, I will start with a summary, a very brief summary of the relevant theoretic view of concepts. Then I will move and give you an overview of the relevant theoretic approach to ad hoc concept construction. And finally, I will present this tentative list of triggers, linguistic triggers of ad hoc concept construction. Now, so we all know that the mind is supposed to work with conceptual representations, these mental concepts that are part of the language of mind, mentalist. These concepts are activated by content or open class words, words such as nouns, adjectives, verbs, adverbs, and the concepts that they activate are supposed to occupy some slot in the logical form that we construct from decoding the linguistic input that we process. The concepts in that logical form do not enter inferential processes in a static manner. They are modulated, and this is a key assumption in relevance theoretic pragmatics. Now, when it comes to concepts, the traditional relevance theoretic view is that concepts comprise varied information, and that information is organized into different entries: the logical entry, the lexical entry, and the encyclopedic entry. In a more recent radical view, concepts are supposed not to not to include this variety of entries, but to just be like some sort of mental folders that are activated, okay, by mental folders that are triggered by specific elements in the input. Now, as I said before, one of the key assumptions of relevance theoretic pragmatics is that those mental entities, concepts, need to be adjusted, fine-tuned, specified when they enter inferential processes. And relevance theoretic pragmatics distinguishes two types of adjustments. On the one hand, broadening, or loosening, and on the other, narrowing or strengthening. These two adjustments have been portrayed as a process of rearrangement of information, the information that is included in the logical and the encyclopedic entries of a concept. In the more recent radical relevance theoretic view, open class words do not encode concept, but simply procedures to enact, to create occasion-specific mental folders, like concepts, okay, that host a variety of information. Now, the result of these two processes, the result of broadening and narrowing, is an occasion-specific, specified, highly idiosyncratic conceptual representation, what we know as an ad hoc concept. And the process yielding this occasion-specific concept is known in relevance theoretic pragmatics as ad hoc concept construction. Ad hoc concept construction is normally portrayed as a free enrichment process, okay? And as such, as a free enrichment process, it is characterized as a process that is free, exempt from linguistic mandate. But relevance theorists normally acknowledge that linguistic material, paralanguage, and contextual assumptions may play a role in ad hoc concept construction. This means that these elements, linguistic material, paralanguage, or contextual assumptions, may somehow determine the output of the process, the output of ad hoc concept construction. If we admit that linguistic material somehow determines ad hoc concept construction, this should lead us to think that ad hoc concept construction should not be always portrayed as a completely free enrichment process, right? And this is the idea behind this talk, and this is the idea that that prompted me to write the paper that was recently published by, with Journal of Pragmatics. And what I'm going to present, the list I'm going to present today of elements linguistic elements that could trigger ad hoc concept construction was partially presented in that paper. Now, so the idea is that ad hoc concept construction should not always be portrayed as a completely free enrichment process, but as a process that could be linguistically, that could be overtly indicated by the presence of some linguistic elements. And now the question comes, what are those elements? And I think that those elements, which could be referred to as triggers, could be classified, could be divided into 4 different groups. Morphological triggers, on the one hand, firstly, morphological triggers, lexical triggers, phrasal triggers, and clausal triggers. So now let's start and have a look at each of these categories of linguistic triggers. And let's begin with morphological triggers. Many languages known as inflectional languages, such as Spanish, Italian, French, Portuguese, Greek, avail themselves with morphemes that are labeled as evaluative morphemes. These morphemes communicate personal judgments, personal assessments of, various personal judgments or various personal assessments. And these morphemes, these evaluative morphemes, are the diminutive and the augmentative. They are traditionally associated with notions such as smallness or littleness in the case of the diminutive, and largeness in the case of the augmentative. But if we examine these morphemes, if we examine the contribution of these morphemes closely, we realize that these morphemes fulfill a variety of functions. In the case of the diminutive and the augmentative, at least in Spanish, we can see that the diminutive and the augmentative can intensify, right? In an utterance such as la habitación está limpita, this is the room is clean plus the diminutive does not communicate the idea that the room is not very clean, but rather that the room is cleaner than expected, or that the cleanness of the room is not an average clean. cleanness. Okay. The diminutive and the augmentative, at least in Spanish, can also be used to express pejoration. In an utterance like Juan ha visto una peliculilla de ciencia ficción, de ciencia ficción, John has watched a science fiction film plus diminutive. The diminutive does not mean or does not communicate the idea that the film was brief, short, but rather that the film was a low-budget film, perhaps that the film was a bad quality film, a cheesy film, whatever. Okay. Also, the diminutive and the augmentative can be used, at least in Spanish, to show positive emotions. In an utterance like María tiene un perrito precioso, Mary has a beautiful doggy, the diminutive does not convey the idea that Mary's dog is small, but rather that the dog that Mary possesses is a dog towards which the speaker has a particular attitude, a dog that causes the speaker to experience certain emotions, such as, I don't know, admiration, approval, whatever. In Spanish, the diminutive and the augmentative can also be used in order to assert intimacy and even to insult mildly. In an utterance like no me seas cabroncete, don't be such a bastard, okay, bastard plus diminutive, the diminutive does not communicate the idea that, you know, the person being talked to is not a small bastard, but, you know, a special type of rascal, you know, a person that can be identified, associated with specific characteristics. In the case of the diminutive alone, in this case, in Spanish, it can also be used to express approximation. El regalo es carillo, the gift is expensive. Does not mean that the gift is not expensive or is, you know, cheap, but rather that the gift is more expensive than expected, or that the price that you will have to pay for the gift in question is higher than you might have predicted. The diminutive alone can also be used in Spanish in order to hedge, to mitigate. In the case of a request like, anda, dame un cigarrito, come on, give me a ciggy, the diminutive does obviously not mean that the cigarette is small, but rather that, you know, the speaker seeks to attenuate the request. And finally, the diminutive in Spanish can also be used to show modesty, okay? In an utterance like, me he comprado un cochecito, what the speaker could be thought to communicate is that the car that he has recently bought is not a small car, but a modest car, a car that doesn't have many extra, you know, like some sort of average car. Okay, so this variety of functions led me to conclude that what the diminutive could mark is that the hearer needs to create an occasion-specific conceptual representation. And this is an idea that I initially published in 2020 and that I revisited in my 2022 publication and in another one which is about to appear. Now, so the diminutive and the augmentative could be morphological markers, morphological signals indicating that you need to construct an ad hoc concept in order to understand a particular utterance. But there are, as I said before, lexical triggers. And within the lexical triggers of our ad hoc concept construction, we have different groups or different elements. One of those elements is articles, okay? Languages have, as you know, definite and indefinite articles. The definite article indicates that the reference of a noun can be identified uniquely, whereas the indefinite article indicates that the referent cannot be uniquely identified. Kate Scott has recently shown and argued that in the case of the definite and the indefinite article, we can think that these articles also contribute to ad hoc concept construction by making manifest certain assumptions, certain beliefs that would be somehow included in the encyclopedic entry of the concept activated, or in that folder activated or constructed by a content word. In an utterance such as there is an old lady standing at your office entrance, the indefinite article would make manifest assumptions to the effect that the lady is unknown, okay? And therefore those assumptions could be sent to that mental folder. The second type of lexical trigger of ad hoc concept construction is demonstratives. As we know, demonstratives situate an intended reference in terms of proximity or distance. And in so doing, they somehow signal the search space for the reference. Demonstratives are normally considered to be procedural elements facilitating reference resolution. They somehow indicate spatial, temporal, emotional, mental, or discourse proximity or distance as regards a deictic sentence. But in plenty of cases when we use demonstrative, the referent can be easily identified, it can be easily located or situated. And if the referent can be identified, in those cases, the demonstrative can be thought to suggest a speaker's attitude or emotion, commitment or involvement what is being talked about. Okay, and this is also an idea that has been proposed by Kate Scott. In an utterance like this, Robin the Locksley is amazing. What the demonstrative seems to do is to narrow down the concept activated by Robin the Locksley, or the concept associated to that proper name on the basis of some remarkable properties or some specific characteristics that are salient or that are helpful at a particular moment. This function of triggering ad hoc concept construction in the case of demonstrative can also be seen in some other uses of demonstrative. Consider an utterance, a text like 19, okay? Imagine a photograph posting on a social network like Facebook, okay? Showing a picture of a happy group of friends, unannounced, I don't know, after having partied or in front of a monument. And the poster writes, "These guys." Of course, you can easily identify who those guys are. Okay, but in this case, the demonstrative would make manifest assumptions, beliefs to the effect that the poster experiences certain emotions, or assumptions, beliefs to the effect that those guys are special to the poster, and so on. So those assumptions, those beliefs, could also be sent to the mental folder or to the encyclopedic entry of the concept, and therefore narrow down the concept or contribute to the delineation of the concept. Something similar could happen in the case of 20. And additionally, in a language like Spanish, we do weird things such as putting the demonstrative either before the modified, either before the noun or after the noun. In an utterance like "esa casa está en venta," that house is on sale, the demonstrative can precede the noun, okay? But in another utterance, in certain varieties of Spanish, we can postpone the demonstrative, and we can say something like "la casa esa está en venta." When we postponed the demonstrative, what we do is to indicate that we have certain attitudes, certain emotions, that we experience something towards the house in question. And that position of the demonstrative could also make manifest certain assumptions regarding to the speaker's psychological state, the speaker's attitude towards the house in question. And those assumptions could also occupy some place in the mental folder activated by the concept, or could be sent to the encyclopedic entry of a concept and adjusted, modulate the concept and restricts its potential denotation. Another type of lexical trigger of ad hoc concept construction is possessives. Possessives, as you know, do not simply indicate a possession relationship, but they can also indicate some other sort of relationship between a referent and the speaker or the hearer. Therefore, they could also be thought to contribute to ad hoc concept construction, and they could also be thought to trigger the modulation of the concept activated by some content word. Okay, they would specify and present the referent in terms of some kind of relation. In an utterance like "my roommate is very funny and easygoing," obviously the roommate is not a possession of yours. Okay, you are not the owner of your roommate, but the possessive indicates like a relationship. Okay, some sort of relationship, and it could modulate, or it could contribute to the activation, to the construction of a concept like, I don't know, person you share the room with, or my, the maid with whom I share room. In languages like Spanish and Greek, we can also use the possessive with proper nouns, and we can say things, at least in some southern varieties of Spanish, like "mi Susana es muy inteligente," literally, "my Susan is very clever." In Greek, we can also say things like "o stavros mu είναι πανέξυπνος." Okay, we can place the possessive, we can add the possessive to a proper noun, a proper name. And what we're doing with this addition is expressing a certain attitude, a certain emotion, or a special type of relationship. Therefore, we can think that the possessive makes manifest assumptions that could also occupy a place in the conceptual folder and could also contribute to conceptual modulation. Let's now move to the phrasal triggers of ad hoc concept construction. And within the group of phrasal triggers, I think that we can also identify certain elements. And the first elements triggering or indicating that ad hoc concept construction is necessary is obviously adjectives. As you know, adjectives fulfill an identifying function because they restrict the set of potential reference. There are what we call endocentric adjective-noun combinations that denote that something of the same ontological type of what the name refers to or what the name denotes is being identified. Combinations such as the red car. Okay, red car refers to a car that is red, and the ontology of the element that is being referred to is the same in both cases. But there are also adjectives that fulfill a fully restrictive function because they limit the reference of the noun exclusively, as in 24a, the only occasion. They can also limit the reference of the noun particularly, as in a certain person, 24b, or chiefly, as in 24c, the chief excuse. Adjectives can also have heightening or lowering effects, okay, as in the case of a true scholar. True emphasizes and brings to the fore certain characteristics, properties, conditions of the scholar. Adjectives can also amplify the denotation of a noun, as in a complete victory, or they can even downtone the reference of a noun, as in a slight effort. Additionally, some adjectives behave as relative descriptors, and as such, they must be interpreted relative to some standard concerning a category to which the noun, to which the reference of the noun belongs. This is the case of a large mouse. You need to identify largeness in terms of perhaps the size of the tail or the fatness of the mouse or whatever. And that adjective could also modulate the concept, okay, on the basis of some attributes. And finally, some adjectives behave as negational descriptors because they negate what the noun would literally refer to. This is the case of a former president or an imitation fur coat. In these two cases, president would not refer to a person that can be called a president, but to a person who is no longer the president of a country or the president of a region or whatever. And in the case of an imitation fur coat, imitation would make fur coat or would prevent fur coat from referring to an actual fur coat. But we convey the idea that the coat in question is made of some sort of fabric that imitates, resembles fur that is furry. Okay. In the case of restrictive, adjective, relative descriptors, negational descriptors, and adjective with a heightening or lowering function, we can say that these adjectives can also indicate that you need an occasion-specific conceptual representation. A second category of phrasal triggers of ad hoc concept is that of expressive expletives. Expletives are empty words, words such as it, in the case of pronouns, there, but also more serious or more taboo words such as fuck, damn, and plenty of other bleeding, and so on. They somehow resemble adjectives, but the problem is that they do not denote qualities or properties. In some other cases, they can be taken to resemble intensifiers, okay? But the thing is that they are elements, words that we normally use in order to voice feelings, emotions, attitudes towards something. And in fact, we can place them by nouns, or we can place them as if they were adjectives, okay? As in 29, they said fucking or damn good nibbles, or I forgot to return the fucking damn book. What the speaker is doing in these two cases is voicing an attitude or an emotion, a feeling of, I don't know, irritation, or a feeling of shock, admiration in the case of 29. For that reason, I think that they can fall within the category of expressive, but what these words can be thought to do is also to indicate that you need to adjust the concept on the grounds of some assumptions that are made manifest by the addition of the expletive in question, okay? Another group of phrasal triggers of ad hoc concept construction is evidential participles. Evidential participles are past participles that do not denote, that do not refer to permanent, inherent, temporary, or accidental properties, conditions, or states. What they do is basically they indicate that the reference of a noun should not be referred to by means of a particular label, at least at the time of speaking. Evidential participles are participles like alleged, suspected, suppose, that modify a noun. And since they modify a noun, they could also be thought to indicate that you need an occasion-specific representation, conceptual entity in order to capture, in order to grasp something that the speaker is talking about at a particular moment. In the case of 31, perhaps that a particular person should not be yet regarded as a murderer, okay? And now, to conclude, let's move to the group of clausal triggers of ad hoc concept construction. And in this group, I include relative clauses, ing clauses, and participial clauses. As you can see, these clauses contribute to specifying and delineating the concept that is supposed to be activated by a content word. So the idea in my work was that, even if relevance theorists acknowledge that ad hoc concept construction is influenced by linguistic material, the problem was that they did not give us a catalog of all the possible linguistic elements that can have some impact on ad hoc concept construction. So my aim in this talk, and my aim in, as I said before, in my recent paper, was to propose this list, this catalog of linguistic triggers of ad hoc concept construction. And as I said before, these triggers can be included in 4 categories: morphological, lexical, phrasal, and clausal. Within morphological triggers, at least in some languages, we have elements like the diminutive and the augmentative morphemes. Within the group of lexical triggers, we can find the definite and the indefinite article, demonstratives and possessives. Within the group of phrasal triggers of ad hoc concept construction, we find adjective, expressive expletives, and evidential participles. And finally, within the group of clausal triggers of ad hoc concept construction, relative clauses, ing clauses, and participial clauses. And this was all. I would like to thank you all for having joined this talk today. Now I think that we have some time for questions, comments. If not, feel free to drop me a line. And here you are some references to the recent works of mine that I have referred to during the talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm just looking for my little clapping button. There you go. So yes, we'll open the floor to questions. Please feel free to put your hand up, to type it in the chat, to unmic and speak. Benoit, you have your hand up. Would you like to ask?
Hello, thank you very much for this presentation. I was very happy to see the topic of your presentation when I saw on the Facebook page, and I was very happy to listen to what you had to say, because I had for many years thought about those questions that I've worked on myself. So I have many positive things to say. I'll just focus on the questions first. I was surprised, to be honest, not to hear anything, not even once, about coercion effects, which is actually the reason I'm mentioning this is because I have worked on this from the perspective of coercion, and the way I approached this was also from the perspective of another theoretical framework, which is a construction grammar, but I think other frameworks have mentioned coercion before, and the ways in which other patterns may have a certain force over other constructions to guide the interpretation process in one direction or another. And so not having mentioned coercion for me may show some, may bring maybe some limits in terms of how much you can explain how linguistic context can guide the construction of ad hoc concepts. Because, for instance, for me, coercion and this way of guiding the construction of ad hoc concepts show that pretty much it's grammatical constructions that can do that, right? That can affect the construction of ad hoc concepts. And so in some cases, I was not really convinced because, for instance, if I apply, the criteria of does the construction have a coercive force, then to me, I'm not sure how much adjectives, for instance, or your expletives really do affect the process of ad hoc concept constructions, or whether it's just a matter of, co-composition. So I'm not sure how much the eventual, noun that you get with an adjective really has a different meaning, or if it's just a combination of the two that creates that particular meaning. It's the same for expletives. One of the things I thought, for the fucking book is there any noun with which you could not use that explicit, that expletive, typically And then you suddenly use that noun, and would that change the meaning of the noun? And if no, then maybe you do not have, an impact of the expletive onto the noun with which it is used. And overall, so sorry, I have all those, thoughts. The last comment I guess I would make is one of the observations I made when I thought about those things was that typically the constructions that have an impact on the construction of adult concepts, so they are grammatical, and one of the underlying notions for me in, grammatical constructions is they are partially schematic. What I mean is, for instance, when you say lexical triggers and you say indefinite, definite articles, to me, they are not lexical triggers because, they are grammaticalized and they systematically take a noun. So it's always a plus noun or the plus noun. And so this nominal slot is what, in a way, does the coercion. So if we have the typical example, I'm going to take 3 beers. Typically, beer is an uncountable noun, but here there's coercion because, okay, you have 3, but you have the morpheme s that systematically attaches to a noun. Or I could have a bit more phrasal and complex, semi-schematic patterns such as to verb your way somewhere. You could say, I walked my way to the bar, or I shouldered my way to the teacher's desk because too many students were in front of the teacher's desk. And here is just the construction to X manner of motion, your way somewhere. It's the verbal position in that construction that tells you it's a manner of motion, even though shoulder typically is not used to express manner of motion. And so I just thought maybe, somewhere to look at would be how much should it be grammatical construction that can impact on the construction of other concepts, and how much coercion has to do with all of this. So sorry, that's a very long comment and very many questions. It's just that your talk was very inspiring. I've thought about these things before, and so I just wanted to voice those ideas. But thank you very much for your presentation.
Okay, so thank you very much, Benoit. Yes, many questions and a rather long comment, but very interesting and thought-provoking. Well, on the one hand, construction. Of course, the fact that there is a construction or that there are like slots that can be filled by means of certain elements also somehow impacts ad hoc concept construction and determines, the possibilities or the output of that process. Yes, it's true that in plenty of cases we have a slot for a determiner, an article, right? And that you can have expectations as to how you can fill that slot. You can say, well, here I can expect to have something that will indicate me whether the referent is known or unknown, whether there is a certain relationship with some interlocutor or whatever. When we are processing, when our attention is attracted by some sort of stimulus, and when we hear a person speaking, of course, our mind is anticipating, making predictions, and of course, structures and our predictions somehow predispose us to, or bias us to say, we can do this, or I can expect this, or whatever. And in some case, there is a bias, some guiding, okay? But the idea is that the fact that you use a particular stimulus, or that you include very specific elements within a verbal stimulus, there is a reason for that inclusion. It's not the same to use an expletive as to use an adjective, okay? Or a particular type of adjective. Okay, so that the element that you use can make manifest certain assumptions. Okay, of course, you could have anticipated something. Okay, and you could have said, well, or your mind could have subconsciously said, well, I can do this here, I can expect this here, but then they guide you. Okay, by means of the assumptions that elements make manifest.
Yeah, I guess that's if I can react. Or
Yes.
yeah. Thanks for your answer. I guess it's because one of the things I always try and distinguish is it's true that any word we use anywhere is going to help us recover the speaker's intended meaning. So if I use, there's a cat in the garden or there's a tiger in the garden, of course, if I use cat or if I use tiger, I'm going to recover a different concept because I've used a different word. But the fact that those words guide us recovering certain assumptions rather than other is not, I think, it's not the same thing as what the procedural meaning of other patterns do in terms of guiding us understanding other words that we've used in that utterance. And so the way in which a content word guides us recovering the speaker's assumption, or the way a procedural item guides us understanding a lexical word, I think it's two different things. So it's not procedural in the same way. And I think that's the distinction I want to maintain, that yes, an adjective guides us, its content word that guides us recover certain assumptions, but not in the same way as a procedural item constrains the use of other content words within that same linguistic context. I think that's why I pointed out, the whole coercion debate, because to me, I think it's not the same thing to say one lexical item help us go in one direction, or one procedural item constrains the possibilities of which direction we go in. Yeah, but yeah, much food for thought.
Okay, I think, basically the idea is, well, these elements could indicate that you need to do something, but how you do that something is something that depends on the hearer, okay?
Okay, so maybe if we move on to Anne now, you've got your hand up.
Hi, thank you very much, Manuel, for a very interesting talk, and I appreciate the catalogue that you've come up with. And so nothing I disagree with, and of course Benoit's comments about coercion and construction grammar are things that I also think are important, but the main comment I wanted to make was what Robin Carsten meant when she talked about linguistic mandates as opposed to free enrichment. I think she would regard all the stuff that you've talked about as free enrichment. What a linguistic mandate is, as I understood it, is some hidden variable or hidden, hidden indexical or something like that, that is required to be filled in order for there to be a proposition expressed. So that if you didn't recover the contextual value, you wouldn't have a complete proposition expressed. So all the stuff that you've been talking about wouldn't be a linguistically mandated thing, because these are not hidden variables where nothing would be expressed unless you retrieved the contextual value. So I think she had a very specific thing in mind when she was talking about linguistic mandates. So I think she would be happy. I don't know, I shouldn't speak for her. Maybe some of the other people more closely associated with Robin have a different opinion about this. But I think this is all free enrichment, as I understand it.
Yes. If I'm not wrong, as I understood Robin Carsten's work, by linguistic mandate, she meant, or she referred to the presence of some element that could trigger. I think that Robin Carsten has written plenty of times against the idea of, and she has rejected the idea of the existence of some hidden constituents or whatever that could do something, okay? But
well, it doesn't even have, I mean, it could just be something like I or an I or here or now, some indexical, which you there's no proposition expressed unless you retrieve the contextual value. That would be a mandate. If I don't figure out who the I is, I don't know what you've said. End of story. that's why it's mandated that I find a value in order to figure out what you said.
Yes. Well,
that's a mandate. Nothing, these other things you're talking about are not mandates in that sense.
okay. So by free enrichment, I think, if I'm not wrong, that she meant that those processes always operate automatically. You want it or not. Okay, but the idea is that there might be some impact, that there could be some elements that somehow direct the process, direct and biases the output of the process. Okay, so they shouldn't be seen as completely free. There is some contribution from other elements, I think.
Well, I mean, free enrichment was never just anything goes. It just meant that it was optional. How you interpreted things were optional. Yeah.
Yeah, I wondered about the use of the word trigger here in terms of maybe that relates to this point. I'm not sure. I would have thought that when there is ad hoc concept formation, it's triggered by the search for relevance, and it seems that these elements to me seem to be guiding that process rather than triggering it. Perhaps, or it could be argued that they are. I don't know if that speaks to the same issue or not, but that was one of my thoughts.
I couldn't hear you very well, Kate. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Is that you or is that me?
I didn't know.
Can other people hear me?
I think maybe you just lean back a bit.
Okay, it's me. Okay. I was saying my issue. Can you hear me if I shout? My neighbours will wonder what's going on. My issue maybe was around the word trigger, and that maybe what triggers the formation of an ad hoc concept is the search for relevance. If we're taking a relevance theoretic approach, and that what these elements perhaps do is guide that in some cases.
Guide or mark or somehow signal some sort of direction.
Yeah, perhaps, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I don't want to jump the queue, so we'll go to Alessandro and I'll come back to my question in a moment, perhaps.
Kate, thank you, but keep talking, because my question is about an unrelated topic. So if you wanted to.
Well, I was just, because you talked about my work on demonstratives, and what I was really doing there was thinking about how, looking for a procedure that those demonstratives encode that guides the reference resolution process. So I wondered if you were looking at maybe what the relation to procedural meaning was in your analysis. Whether you see the diminutives, for example, as encoding a procedure.
Yes.
And what that would be.
I think that diminutive would encode a procedure, and the procedure would be something like you need to adjust the concept activated by the word I'm attached to.
Okay. But wouldn't you maybe be adjusting anyway if relevance not mandation, obviously. If a relevant interpretation involved adjusting the concept anyway, you would be doing that. So would the diminutive be giving more of a guidance as to perhaps how
it would be adjust? It would be giving more guidance, like you can expect something like an approximation, like something that denigrates what you refer to, or it just gives you like clues, possibilities.
I think they're really interesting, just because
adjust this along these lines.
Right. Okay. Yeah. It'd be interesting to try and flesh out what along those lines is, because it seems like there's a really wide variety, really interesting examples in how different the same diminutive can, what the different ways it can affect the words, and perhaps diminutive is a bit of a misnomer in many examples. Do those diminutives ever mean little? So there was one example about a car. Is it ever the case that it could mean a little car, or does it always have to mean, a non special car?
Well, it depends. You know, the way we interpret the diminutive has to do with your facial expression and, of course, intonation and paralanguage. Okay, so, you know, there is more. Okay, the diminutive, like, you know, the diminutive, in my view, would encode an instruction, a procedure. Like, you need to adjust the concept. And then that, you know, the procedure is like, would be like specified or determined by additional evidence coming from your facial expression, the intonation, and paralanguage, and of course, knowledge. Okay.
Okay, I'll stop. I'll shut up now and pass over to Alessandro for your question. Thank you for letting me jump in front.
Thank you. Thank you. So I just have that's a question. It's a curiosity. And because of your work with epistemic vigilance, I was wondering whether you thought how epistemic vigilance mechanisms may influence how these triggers that you've listed influence the processing of ad hoc concepts. I'll give you an example of what I had in mind, if that makes sense. Just that, for example, you were talking about narrowing and broadening. And I'm thinking that if I have low expectation of competence of the speaker, maybe I'd be more cautious in being guided by triggers that indicate broadening. Or if I have low expectation of benevolence of the speaker, I may operate cautiously with triggers that indicate narrowing, for example. Like in your example, you gave, I don't know, anda, dame un cigarrito. Like, I think like this person wants to communicate, just wants one cigarette, but then I might doubt that and think he's gonna smoke the whole pack. Or eres un cabronazo. I don't know, like, I hope you catch what my meaning is. I've tried to explain it. Yeah. Thank you. And I loved your presentation. Yeah.
Well, to be honest, I hadn't thought about the impact of this signals, these markers on the mechanisms of epistemic vigilance, but only I have thought about that in the case of evidential participles. Evidential participles would alert epistemic vigilance mechanisms to the fact that you shouldn't call a person, you shouldn't refer to a person, or you shouldn't refer to any state of affairs, a particular state of affairs, by means of a label. They would be like, you know, an alert call. Okay, listen, well, this person might have done this, or this state of affair might amount to this event or to that event, but you need to be cautious. Okay. But in the case of, you know, the diminutive, for example, yes, it can be true that in plenty of cases, at least in Spanish, we use it in order to make a request. Would you mind to hold on a minutito, segundito?
Yeah.
Right? We can use it, but you know, this also has to do whether you interpret that as, you know, a very little amount of time, or, you know, a significantly larger amount of time, has also to do with cultural knowledge and also knowledge about the person you are talking to. Okay, of course, and this is just an example, if you are a rather cheeky person, I've known you for, I don't know, 20 years, and I know that you smoke and that you keep on asking people for cigarettes or whatever, you know, I might expect you to ask me for more cigarettes. Okay, but you know, that would something that, you know, that would come from knowledge, from encyclopedic knowledge, I think.
Thank you.
And Valandis, you have a question?
Hi, Manuel. First of all, I want to congratulate you on your Greek. and secondly on your presentation. Okay, it was very, very Paracalo. So it was a very, very interesting presentation, very original. I really loved it. I've got a couple of comments. It seems to me that the source of ad hoc concept construction for you on many, many occasions is co-text rather than context. So I've got this example, like for instance, because we talked about, you know, definite descriptions and everything, like the definite article and everything, possessive adjectives. What the sentence basically gives you, collocations. I've got this example, like John is a bachelor. Okay, when John is a bachelor is basically a metaphor. So suppose that John is not a bachelor, he's married, okay. But you say something like this to describe John as a womanizer. So that's basically a metaphor. You've got some kind of broadening, and for you to be able to interpret it this way, you need a lot more than what the sentence gives you, and that's the context, right? But it seems to be that your type of ad hoc concept construction, well, your taxonomy on many occasions assumes that the source of ad hoc concept construction is collocations. That, for me, if this is true, that seriously departs from free enrichment. I think that's the opposite of what Anne said earlier. I'm not sure, however, and I want your comment on this.
Okay, first, you know, my aim when talking about linguistic elements that could trigger ad hoc concept construction was not to deny the impact of other elements such as paralanguage and, of course, knowledge, as I said before, okay, contextual assumptions, okay. You know, the problem is that when you write a paper, you know, there is space limit. You know, perhaps in some cases the paper is written for a special issue or whatever, and you need to focus on something. My idea, of course, it was not to deny what Robin Custon and Tim Wharton and some other people working within relevance theoretic pragmatics had already said, that, you know, there is some impact, but was to like give more details about the sort of things and how those sort of things could impact and direct the process, okay? It is co-text, as you said, okay? It is collocations, of course. It is, but additionally, paralanguage, okay? But, you know, when you say paralanguage, could all paralinguistic signals steer ad hoc concept in the same way? For instance, what about emblems? To an Italian, this means, and depending on, you know, the intensity with which you circle your finger, the meaning can be modulated, okay? Or if you say this is an emblem, a cultural gesture, okay? In some cases, they can contribute to ad hoc concept construction, but do all gestures contribute to ad hoc concept construction? And gestures are part of paralanguage. Another type of gesture that could contribute could be the case of illustrators, okay? Gestures that you use to depict, okay? Gestures that accompany your utterance. For instance, when you refer to the size of an object, you can say, you can do this, okay? But what about language-like gestures? What about other involuntary gestures? I think that they wouldn't contribute, okay? There are categories, there are groups of paralinguistic elements that can make a contribution, okay? And of course, there is knowledge, contextual knowledge that can also influence. And of course, there are many more things. Yeah, there are personal biases, what Artem Mustajovsky called psychological styles or cognitive styles. Okay, the way you adjust a concept can also depend on your personal history, and so on.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Thank you to all the questions, and thank you to Manuel. We've come to the half-hour mark now, so we've been going for an hour, so we'll draw things to a close. Thank you, Manuel, once again for your fascinating talk, which stimulated lots of discussion and questions. I think we'll be.
Thank you for your invitation, and also thank you for all your questions and comments.
And yeah, I'm sure we'll all be looking at the paper and taking a closer look at your ideas. So thank you very much for that. Our next session is on the 23rd of February, which I think is going to come around very quickly. And it's Fabrizio. Give us a wave. Who will be?
I'll promise I'll mend my voice by then. Yeah.
He's going to be talking on the a cognitive pragmatic approach to translation and interpreting. So we'll look forward to that session. So thank you all for joining us this evening, if it is evening where you are, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.
You too.
Thank you.
Thanks, Manuel.
Thank you.
Bye.